Okay. I've been a bit of a pause. However, as I'm starting my online training program next week, that's the 25th of May 2020, because that obviously won't be true every time anybody watches this. And being able to access the information in my book, especially those people who live in countries where it's difficult to get it delivered. So this is especially for you. So I'm up to chapter 4, which is entitled Thinking with Your Body. And just to say that that's important. I think a lot of people who learn NLP still do it intellectually. And there is an intellectual side to it. But for example, when we come to the modeling part, it is a whole body immersion experience. It is called the study of experience, not by chance, because it is experiential. So that's just something about, and I'll revisit that and how to apply that. But if you're just thinking about things, even though this chapter perhaps mistakenly is called Thinking with Your Body, it is about experiencing. And the quote at the beginning is, "It is impossible to not communicate." It's by Paul Watzlawick. So NLP is a process of identifying the essence of excellence. That was the emphasis in the 3rd edition. Really, it is the process of studying experience. And there is that shift to that in the 4th edition. However, in this one, it was concentrating particularly on the essence, which is actually what it was originally about. And the essence is very often the elusive part of what we do. Suppose I'm skilled in the way I can build rapport in business meetings with potential new clients, and you want to know how I do that. I could tell you that when I prepare for a meeting with a new client, I think about the outcomes for the meeting. I can also tell you that I review what I know about the company and pay attention to how I build rapport throughout the process, especially in the first few moments of the meeting. That's all very well and all very sound. But the key question is, can you reproduce the procedure I have explained well enough to get the same result? That's the key. Can you get the same result? Do you know how to measure that? So the clues lie not so much in the content of what I say, as in my non-verbal behavior and in my actions, but also in my beliefs and thoughts as well. So as you watch me speak, you might notice that as I talk about a new client, I look fleetingly up and to my right. And so noticing eye movements is really key. What am I doing what I'm doing in this moment is imagining visually what this company would be like if it were to implement my thoughts in the future. I do this each time I approach a new client, but I take this thought, or I have done, so much for granted, and it's so unconscious that I didn't for a long time think to mention it in my explanations of my client-facing strategies. However, this eye movement of looking up and to the right is a very strong clue that what I'm doing, don't worry about right or left, just notice where somebody looks. Don't worry about categorizing right, left, but it just happens to be that which is my right. I don't know how you're seeing it on the screen. That what I'm doing at that moment is creating a visual image I've never seen before. By being sensitive to my eye movements, I'm creating something visually when I do that, even though you may not know the content of what I'm doing. This clue can give you the prompt, if you're studying what I'm doing, to ask me something like, so what's happening now, or what happens next? You could be more specific. And if you are sure that I'm picturing something, you could say, what are you picturing? However, it's better to be neutral and say, so what's happening right now? That could be the prompt for me to realize that I'm creating this visual image. This is one small clue that opens the door to one of the most significant pieces of my thinking when I meet a new client. That's imagining the scenario. So by learning to be sensitive to body language, you can begin to detect the pieces of the strategies that really make the difference. And these are the pieces that otherwise lie undetected. It's the ability to detect body language patterns in this way that's unique to NLP and makes the process of modeling so very special and important in the way we learn. Because you're learning to study somebody's experience. You're not just asking them to tell you what they do, because that is a waste of time. So the eyes have it. Our eyes, it's one of the dimensions. Our eyes they give powerful clues to the way we are thinking. Ask somebody who claims to be a good speller to spell Mississippi. Watch them do it. What are their eye movements? Watch carefully, because some of the movements can be really fleeting. They can be very fast. Most good spellers visualize the word they're spelling by picturing the word as if it were on a screen in the front and slightly above them. So they might do that. They typically look up and to their left, but some might look up and to their right or straight ahead. Some might go with a defocused stare. These eye movements usually, that's important, usually characterize visual thinking, a key part of a successful spelling strategy, usually. The way we use our eyes indicates the kind of thinking that's going on. So bear in mind that they're not facts, just tendencies, and everybody is unique. It's vital to calibrate to the individual rather than to apply these universally. That's so important. There's my home phone, but I'm going to leave it. It's usually junk. So for example, eyes, there are diagrams in the book. So eyes up and to the left, usually. So if I go like that, it's usually visual remembered. I'm remembering something I've seen before. So this is where we look when we're remembering images we've seen before. The face of our partner, the last place we went on holiday, our workplace, or what we did yesterday, for example. Eyes up and right, it's visual constructed, usually. This is where we look when we're constructing images we've not seen before. I mean, I keep saying usually. The key thing is to calibrate to the person. These are just tendencies, I'm telling you. So this is where we look when we're constructing images we've not seen before. Ourselves in a location that we've always dreamt of, for example, but never been to. Or a colleague with an expression on their face we've never seen. Or our home redesigned, or the vision for our business. So, and similarly, visual can also be eyes straight ahead, defocused. You know, when somebody's kind of looking in your direction, but looking through you. The clue as to whether it's going to be remembered or constructed is often determined by the way that person's weight is distributed in the rest of the body. You know, if they're kind of, their weight's to the left, probably it's remembered. If it's to the right, probably constructed. So, and then next one, eyes to the side, left or right. So eyes to the left usually is auditory remembered. Now that's where we look when we're remembering sounds that we've heard before, like a favorite piece of music or the sound of a friend's voice. Eyes in the other direction, to the side, to your ears, is auditory constructed. So that's where you look when you're creating a sound that you've never heard before. So someone you know speaking in a completely different tone of voice, for example. Eyes down, and maybe to your left, maybe. Auditory digital, inner dialogue. So that's where we look when we're having a conversation with ourselves or asking. So if you're going to yourself, now I wonder what they mean by that. What should I do about that? What was the thing? When you have that kind of conversation in your head, so that would be inner dialogue. And eyes in the other direction and down. We have the expression downright angry. Well, that's typically where people go when they experience feelings. Interesting how we have these expressions in language, like we talk about look up, and to get out of a bad feeling, and let's say downright angry. The direction might vary in that left and right might be reversed, but usually visual is up or straight ahead and defocused, and auditory is usually looking towards the ears. There's a theory that left-handed children of left-handed parents are more likely to have the reverse to what I've just described. So, very important clues, because they give a kind of access to sometimes fleeting thinking patterns that can often be very key to the strategy that person's using. How else do we think through our body? Our thoughts leak out through our body language, which is one of the reasons it's important to be aware of what thoughts are being communicated through this medium. Body language is everything in our behavior with which we communicate, other than the content of what we're saying. So the way we say those words, the tone, the volume, the pitch of our voice, is also body language. So in detecting whether we are thinking in a visual, auditory, or feelings way, not only can we use eye movements as clues, we can also detect clues in people's body language and their non-verbal behavior. So for example, somebody thinking in a visual way will typically speak very quickly in a high voice. They're usually trying to use, well, they are trying to use words to get across an image. And so, we say, one image is worth 1,000 words. If you're trying to describe an image, you're going to use a lot of words quickly. They tend to breathe high in the chest, so it's usually rapid, shallow breathing. They gesture kind of high in the air. They're kind of showing you, this image that they've got of something. And they can often show tension in the body. I mean, high chest breathing isn't exactly relaxed breathing. And someone thinking in an auditory way, will typically speak in a rhythmical way, almost tunefully. They'll talk mid-tone, breathe mid-chest, gesture slightly lower than somebody who's thinking in a visual way. They often have the head tilted to one side, almost as if to accentuate, what they're taking in through their ears. And they frequently touch their ears and their mouth, almost like the old style sort of telephone gesture. And somebody thinking in a feelings way, like connecting with their emotions, will typically speak in a very resonant way, slowly. They're kind of feeling their way through a sentence. So they have frequent silences. They'll breathe low in the chest, deep, slow breaths, almost as if they're sighing. A gesture down and to their right. So, as I say, you may have heard the expression downright angry. And they'll probably have a laid back body posture, sort of relaxed and free moving. So body language consists of voice, body, tone, rhythm, facial expressions, head and face, intonation, accent, pauses, eye movements, muscle tension, skin color, body movement, posture, arm and hand gestures, frequency and nature of touch, body rhythm, kind of movement or stillness that's characteristic, stresses, speed, emphasis, head movements, eye contact, mouth expressions, the timing of movements, breathing position, high, mid or low in the chest. Facial lines give a lot of clues as to how people think. Head position, proximity to other people. I noticed on a Zoom call I had recently, when I spoke to one of the people on their screen, they would come really forward. I move in and out quite a bit when I'm changing my thinking. Breathing rate, position and direction of legs. It's interesting because that's one thing we don't tend to get on Zoom. You get head and shoulders. It doesn't matter. You can use whatever to read patterns. All of these elements and more are communicating our innermost thoughts every moment of every day. It's not that people don't recognize these signals. They do. The staff in one company I worked in knew very well that when the managing director's lip became taut and whitened slightly, because they'd talk about this, it's time to stop asking questions because you'd be getting annoyed. So we do all read one another's body language, but many of us have become used to ignoring the signals we detect unconsciously. We've learned to delete or distort what we pick up intuitively. And often people say, oh, that was my instinct. Whether they've acted on it or not is another matter. So by developing our conscious awareness of what these signals might be telling us, we start to draw on an immense untapped potential in our communication. So the importance of reading body language. So learning to be aware of body language and the differences between one person and the next and one culture and the next creates a marked improvement in how well we understand and influence other people, and they us. Some people seem to have a natural ability to influence, creating a climate of instant rapport in which all parties feel at ease with each other. Others may find that these people eminently approachable, easy to talk to on any issue, with an obvious advantage in any negotiating, communicating, or influencing situation. So the outstanding conclusion that's reached by researchers in this field is that typically more than 90% of our ability to influence lies outside the content of what we say. If we don't understand and respect difference, we're liable to judge what we don't know as negative. So, for example, in the UK, there's a very much higher expectation of feedback to what we say, even if it's just a grunt, than is the norm in many other cultures. Consequently, we can find lower levels of response to what we say, especially if we're talking on the phone, very disconcerting. We might, for example, be tempted to read it as disinterest. So we not only limit ourselves by what we can say, the choices we make about how we use words make communication even more risky. When we don't understand what we hear in a meeting, for example, most of us are unlikely to say so. If we don't entirely agree with what someone is saying, most of us are likely to say they do agree or say nothing. So, when people say, "You got that?" Most people go, "Hmm." However, whatever choices we make with the words that we do and don't use, our non-verbal signals communicate what we truly feel. So by learning to pay attention to body language signals, we can know when to end a conversation. It's pretty important. We can tell to what extent the person we're speaking to has understood what we're saying. We can determine the level of agreement we've reached. We can recognize the degree to which we've touched the core motivation of the person we're talking to. We can establish how we represent time and the impact of that on the way we use our time. We can recognize when we've created a connection. We can determine when we have established a deep level of rapport. We can recognize what kind of emphasis in a presentation will work best in getting our message across. And we can ascertain whether we've read and respected the culture of the person that we're dealing with. So in the NLP process of modeling, particularly, it's by watching and listening and immersing ourselves into the style of body language of the person that we're modeling that we can find out how someone structures their thinking to achieve what they do. We can elicit the unconscious and therefore the taken for granted ways of thinking that make the difference in the results we achieve. We can do a kind of inner benchmarking of excellence rather than relying only on external behavior. And it's often the inner things that make the difference. We can deduce the values and beliefs behind someone's behavior. And we can recognize other people's different emotional states. So by developing our sensitivity to body language signals, we can tell when someone has changed the way they are thinking. We can begin to determine what strategies they're using when they are achieving what they want and when they're not, which is very useful in coaching. So I was talking with a client, as an example, I was talking with a client about her goals for her work and her life. And she talked about two goals. The first was a goal she'd been given in her work. And as she talked about this, her face was pale, her lips were taut, and she sat forward with her shoulders hunched. Then she talked about a goal that she had, which was to travel and work in Canada. And the moment she began to think about this, her face flushed slightly, her shoulders dropped, the muscles of her face relaxed, and she began to move her arms in a fluid, easy way as she gestured while she spoke. So what we established with not too much difficulty was that when she was thinking about her work goals, she was very much into what we call problem thinking, concentrating on what she had to do and what she ought to do. She was dissociated, disconnected in her thinking as she did this. However, when she thought about her goals for working in Canada, she immediately imagined herself there, associated. And she could see it as if she were looking through her own eyes and hearing it through her own ears. Most important of all, she was feeling it as if she was there. The body signals she was evidencing for the second goal were characteristic of what was for her compelling motivation. So most people have two characteristic states, one where they are aligned, as she was when she was thinking about Canada, and they're in touch with their unique skills and attitudes, and one when they're out of touch with who they are and their true capabilities, an incongruent state. Each state's got its own characteristic thinking patterns, beliefs, and body language. And by learning to recognize the characteristics of each and the distinctions between the two, we can learn how to choose the most effective one for the outcomes we want to achieve. So the traditional, I might pause mid-chapter with this one. So just that you take these things in because they're really important things. So traditional ways of reading body language, and you might not be able to see it, but I just folded my arms, and there would be a traditional way of reading that and saying, oh, she's defensive. You might have read books on body language saying that, for example, if someone is crossing their arms, it means they're defensive. Or maybe you've heard that if someone touches their nose with the back of their finger, this means they're lying. In my experience, it's foolish and disrespectful to make these kinds of judgments because it can mean different things. And that's what's important about NLP. We respect and calibrate to each person uniquely. So the way body language is used in NLP is very different. In NLP, we respect that each person has their own unique patterns of body language. The challenge is to be sensitive to that and not make assumptions, either positive or negative, about what those signals mean. So one of my friends, for example, was commenting on somebody they'd just met. She's very intelligent, he said. And I asked, how do you know this? And he replied, she speaks very quickly. So that was his interpretation. We might find, for example, that crossed arms for one person might mean something completely different to what they mean for somebody else. One of the aims of NLP is to heighten our awareness of patterns in body language for everybody that we meet, so that we can learn how to flex our behavior to connect with them if we so choose, and in a way that's respectful of who they are. So one of the underlying beliefs is that, and this is the heading of this section, mind and body are one. What we think is how we are. Through our body language, we show our skills, our values, our beliefs, what kind of person we are, our cultural preferences, and even our purpose in life. So by a handshake, we reveal everything that anyone can ever know about us if they're sensitive to us in this way. We show what we're feeling every moment of every day. If we are expecting disagreement in a meeting we're about to attend, we show that in our body language. I was coaching somebody recently and they were telling me a lot about themselves. And I said, well, I said, notice you're not asking any questions. He said, well, I need to tell you everything for you to know about me. Well, I kind of had learned an awful lot about this person in the first few minutes by the patterns in their nonverbal behavior. And that's more significant usually than somebody telling you what they think you ought to know. An example, the case study here. When Peter expected disagreement in a meeting, he ran a negative inner dialogue, imagining the worst that each person might say to each other. And as a result, his eyes went down and to his left into inner dialogue. At the same time, the muscles in his face became taut and he lowered his head. You wouldn't have to have too many meetings with Peter in this state to begin to know what was going to happen next. And as we remember happy memories, we show that in our body language too. So, for example, when Julia thought about the success she'd achieved in her involvement with the board of directors, she looked up and to her left initially, remembering what one of the most successful meetings looked like. She then started to smile slightly and looked down and to her right as she associated into her feelings when the board had achieved a major agreement about the way forward in the business, and they'd done that in a creative way. And she looked sideways, like to her ears and to her right, as she imagined some of the conversations she expected to have in the next meeting. And all the time she was rhythmically swinging her foot side to side. So our body language reveals the truth of our inner thoughts and feelings. There's little we can do about the subtlest of signals that we communicate to the world at large. There was a very interesting video I saw recently of Andre Agassi talking about how he read Boris Becker in a tennis match. I recommend that you Google that, because he could tell by where Boris Becker put his tongue, and Boris Becker had just an outstanding serve. So unless you could read it, you were just going to crack under the serve. And Andre Agassi had worked out that if he was going to serve to the side of the court, he put his tongue to the side of his mouth. If he was going to serve straight down the middle of the court, he put his tongue to the middle of his mouth, just slightly. And he said he could read it. And apparently Boris Becker used to go home, to his wife and say, "This man's reading my mind. I don't know how he's doing this." But it's a really good video to watch. It's exactly that. Andre Agassi was modeling Boris Becker. So the next bit of this chapter goes on to what we call the filters, the different choices that we're making in the way we filter our experience. I'm just going to pause there. I think I'll do that as a separate, because that's another 6 or 7 pages for you to think about this first part. And then I'll come on to these filters, which are sometimes known as the meta programs.